Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors, experts in the biggest questions in tech. This is Making Revenue Tick. Hello and welcome to Making Revenue Tick. I'm joined by one of my favorite people in the world, who every time he phones me, I say, what a lovely name to see in my phone. It's Rakesh Rathod. Rakesh, how you doing?
I'm good, Richard. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Pleasure to have you here. I know, Rakesh, we've worked together now in a number of different companies for your go-to-market hiring needs. And we've always talked about doing a podcast together because every time I talk to you, we just have these amazing conversations about go-to-market, startups, building, sales. And there's a wealth of knowledge that you've got that I think would be fascinating for our audience to hear. Not that I'm trying to build you up too much. I think you're one of the best revenue leaders in EMEA. And what I'd love to understand is, if we break this down into really simple terms, what's the business problem that you help companies to solve?
Yeah, sure. So the business problem comes in a number of factors, especially in the startup world, where organizations have been around for 6 or 7 years, or sometimes even less, and they've got their Series A, and they've got they're working towards their Series B or their Series C, and things start to get serious. So to date, the revenue that has been generated has been satisfactory, but now double-digit growth is expected. You're expected to grow the teams, and make it a success. And that's intertwined with lots of different things, right? It's a whole ecosystem of people, process, and products and programming that actually comes into play to make it work. So the problem is, for how do we go from single-digit numbers to double-digit growth within a short period of time? Within a 3 or 5 year kind of period. And there's lots of things that attach to that.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. You mentioned a couple of things there in terms of the stage of growth these businesses might be in, that kind of like seed A, B kind of range. I think when we were working at Builder, you just got your Series C, if I believe. And then that went on to obviously explosive growth. Like, maybe for the people who don't have the opportunity to already know you, could you tell us a bit about the type of companies that you've made a career out of helping?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in software about coming up to 25 years now. Worked for the large organizations in the past, like sort of the IBMs of the world, and took a lot of knowledge and understanding in terms of what makes these organizations tick, what the kind of gaps and problems and bridges that are needed. But then I took took that knowledge to the startup world, into the challenges they have and how can they be helped. So, what I normally find is a lot of kind of structure needs to be put in. So when you have a startup, it's all fun, it's all great. You've got the great employee culture going on. But when things start getting serious, where either the board or investors say, right, we need double-digit growth now, or we need to get serious about our revenue and start moving, kind of changing gears quicker, that's where the skill set is needed. So my job is really to come in and build a team, build the kind of ecosystem, build the processes, and bring harmony into an organization where the results are actually met. And I think that's very important, because just going in saying, I'm a silo, it's all about the revenue and the sales in a vacuum, that's the wrong thing to do. So it's really kind of building the whole ethos of, this is what makes a startup or a mid-sized organization kind of tick.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. What is it you love about this part of the market? Why do you love understanding what makes startups tick?
That's an interesting question. Now, I could say I know I love whatever, but what really I really enjoy doing is I enjoy building. And I think building in the sense of building all these different areas of the business that all then come to kind of together. It's almost like a large molecule atom, right? Has lots of different parts that all need to work in kind of sync. And it's and building that kind of culture of the right number of thinkers and the right number of execution within the business to get the output, right? If you have too many thinkers and not enough execution, you don't move quick enough. If you have too many execution, not enough thinkers, you also can't move. So what I really enjoy doing is building and seeing those results. So now being able to walk into the CEO's office and say, right, I think we're doing this incorrectly. I think we should do this, and be given the kind of autonomy to say, right, go and test it out. Let's do a quick pilot. Let's do a week test. And if it works, let's roll it out. So that level of kind of agility, in the sense of, you're a high performing speedboat rather than a tanker, that you can move fast, drive change, and see the results. And that part of building is what really kind of floats my boats.
Yeah, I love that. It's a really good point because there's so many people who have lots of knowledge, but just don't have the execution. I was listening to a podcast. It was Mr. Wonderful, actually, from Shark Tank on Diary of a CEO. And he talked about his number one thing when he hires people is, can you execute? Because he said most can't, or they don't, or they won't. And so the execution piece is really interesting. And then I had a brilliant conversation yesterday with someone who said one of the things that separates these outliers or these intrapreneurs, which you definitely are, like the entrepreneurs inside a business, is you're comfortable taking messy actions. And I know you've said about like it's the thinkers versus the doers. How important would you say at particular startups that propensity to take action, even into the unknown, is for businesses to actually go and achieve the growth goal?
I think it's very important to move forward. If you continue doing the kind of the de facto and this is the status pro quo, and we're going to continue doing what we've always done, you're not going to get the increased output that you need. So you need to have the thinking ability on the leadership side, but also on the ground level as well, right? Is being able to come up with new ideas, saying like, why don't we try something different, even if it's on a sales side, right? If it's a sales representative or account executive says, you know what, I had this conversation and it's totally different to how we normally would pitch it, but it really worked, and I'm going to go do a campaign and run and roll this out and see what happens. So that level of kind of thinking and autonomy of thinking by yourself and then executing as well is very important. And I think this should be uh, um, kind of noticeable throughout the organization, right? It's the thinking and the execution. And each kind of like if it's no, regardless if it's marketing or it's growth or if it's sales or it's their revenue team or finance, being able to do that right level of thinking and execution to move forward as a business to achieve the end goal, which is the double-digit growth and the big evaluation, I think is very important.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think because this is like the masterclass version, right? And it's about experts answering the big questions in tech. It would be great to get your experience on not only the challenges that you see businesses facing, but also some of the mistakes that you've seen in some of those, the common things that people just get wrong. So we can help them to avoid making it, or maybe if people are in that kind of in the midst of that mistake, they feel seen, feel heard, and they see like what they might do. And then I know you've got a process around actually what are the things you should consider to go and get this stuff right more often and actually have that chance of achieving the goal. So, Rakesh, what are the questions that you most commonly get asked by businesses at this stage?
So the question I normally get asked by organizations is, first of all, what was the revenue year one, year two, year three, and what was the revenue before you joined, and where did you get the company over X amount of period of time? But outside of that, one of the most important questions that come up is, where were the failures? Where were the challenges? Where did things actually not work out? What did you learn from it? And I think one of the big ones in the room for me is when organizations are going through their different level of funding from A to B to C, there seems to be a big influx of we need to hire very, very quickly because we're now a company that's valued at X. And for that valuation, we need to have a number of people at Y. So I personally fallen into that trap myself, where we hired extremely quickly to hit a timeline, and then had to deal with the challenges thereafter, where just enough time wasn't put into understanding each individual and what their ability was to do, um, and missing kind of the important kind of behavior parts. So the kind of simple maths of four people in your team are superstars. If we double that, we'll have eight superstars. Doesn't normally work. And one of the biggest learning curves is it's not all about the experience, and we'll come on to that on one of the next questions. But looking at, oh, this person's got 15 years of experience doesn't necessarily relate to success within what you're trying to achieve, because you're changing everything about that previous person's role into something new. So that behavior and the attitude and dynamicness is something that's more important than how much years of experience they've got on a CV.
Yeah, yeah, but it's what people index on, right?
Correct.
Like the number one thing, and it's really hard. It's hard to shift that mindset until I think you show people some data, or maybe I can give you some data to help you in your next conversation around that. I've been researching this because I'm really it's that I'm going through a learning curve too,
Mhm.
and it's exactly the same challenge as going. Businesses always say, the number one criteria we want you to find is someone with 5 years of this specific experience in our specific industry. And it's like, well, if you think the logic's actually a bit broken. It's like if you want someone with 5 years experience, let's say selling into enterprise in your industry, and you're offering them the same package, the best people in that company who delivered really consistent results over a 5-year period have probably moved on to do something else, or they're incredibly high earning now. If you, to even match that salary, particularly for a startup, you might just break the startup by trying to match that salary. But also, why would someone at that kind of level want to continue to do that for another 5 years? They'll want some growth, they'll want some progression.
Mhm.
But also, it doesn't always translate because there's so many factors that would make someone successful in one business and not in another. And the data I found is that 89% of mishires are down to an attitudinal and cultural misalignment.
Yeah.
And only 15% of companies actually have mapped out what good attitudes and behaviors mean for their business. What does an A player look like in their business? So it comes down to each individual hiring manager's preferences. And when you've got 5 people involved in the decision, of course, people's biases are going to kick in, and obviously you're going to go with the safe bet and hire from IBM, for example. Like, so let's talk about that experience.
Mhm.
First of all, why do you think it happens? Why do businesses index so much on experience when the data clearly shows actually attitudes and behaviors are worth much more?
Yeah, I think because it's when it comes down to sales, it's so closely tied. Your success is closely tied to a number, right? And that's the number where all you have to kind of really pivot on. So that's the first place to go. Now it's ironic because you see memes on LinkedIn every single day saying whatever's happened in the past is in the rear view mirror. You need to face forward to go places. And then the first thing we do when we're hiring is look in the rear view mirror and see where this person's been, and then you're expecting them to relate to how they can help you. The product was different, the ICP was different, the customer was different, everything was different in that scenario. Now you lift them and shift them into something else, and then you suddenly find they're not able to achieve the same. So I think beyond going for the numbers, it's the individual, right? The individual being a thinker, execution, and being able to perform um with the ecosystem, but also think on their own feet, right? It's that behavior that we kind of spoke about. There's a certain attitude. So if I think about my previous organizations and I think about the top 4 or 5 people that were high performing, so we're talking about 100% plus year on year, year on
Yeah.
year. If I
Yeah.
look at their attitudes, yeah, they had 3 to 5 years experience, nothing major, so some for even less. But what they did have was that behavior and the drive and the urgency where they wanted to do really well. They wanted to do everything needed to make them successful, and they went ahead and did it. And that's out of the key difference between the previous hires that I made and the hires that actually did work out for us.
There's so much to unpick there. Let's talk about maybe some of the signals that people might misread, right? So, obviously you have brought some of these people into your teams before and then realized after a while that they weren't going to be successful in the business. What are some of those things that people often will misread the signals in an interview that you've learned actually now are red flags or warning signs to be a bit aware of and help to make a better decision? What are some of those things that you found out didn't really work?
Yeah, I think it's the amount of guidance someone is required to get the job done, right? So on the CV, they have lots of experience, but when it comes down to the execution, you've got to guide every single step. And the guys and the girls that kind of outperformed were able to think outside of the box without being constantly given that guidance, right? Without constantly being told, well, we're in a sales cycle. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? They're actually one step ahead. They use their level of autonomy to go and do that. You know what? I'm going to go and try something different. I'm going to roll this out. So it's less of the push. It's more them actually pulling the weight, saying, I want to be successful. In order to do that, I have to go do something different. And that's where it kind of counted. And a level of urgency as well, right? That's the important thing. And one of the things that I actually learned was, rather than individual targets, rather than looking at a target as annually or quarterly, focusing on weekly and monthly makes the change. Then the numbers actually get delivered. If you think about that big number and you don't break it up and you don't think weekly, what impact or value am I adding? What am I going to achieve this week? And those within those 4 weeks within the month, I'm going to achieve X. Then you're kind of waiting for that big blue to come in. And as we know, they don't, they're far and far between now. You've got to have a process and a structure in mind to make sure that you're achieving on a regular basis.
What are the backgrounds that you've seen most commonly in terms of the patterns translate to that high execution, high resourceful, high ownership, high execution, higher?
And I can't say it's for all, but something that I identified, and I think you identified the same thing, working with me, was I found people with sporting backgrounds have got a very different DNA when it comes to how they actually execute on everything that they do. Very, 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 very competitive. And when they're not doing the job, they're basically similar to sports. They're training to be best at their game. And some of the guys that I worked with previously had very little experience in sales. You know, they had some level of software experience, not too major, some experience in sales, but they basically wanted to build their career, and they were very, 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 very focused. And their aim was right to hit those numbers, be the person at the top of that leaderboard, and then kind of move on. And one of the things that how they were different is when I asked them for, and I do this with all candidates and people I speak to, is ask them, what is your personal 3 and 5 year plan, right? What's your personal plan? Where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? And I think having that conversation is very important at the start, because someone who's got planned out saying, right, I want to do this for X amount, then do this, then I want to become a leader, or want to start my own business, clearly shows that they've got a plan in mind that they're executing against every single day. So yeah, that kind of drive, that sheer passion, and that ability to move forward quickly and in an agile environment is what makes a successful person in a startup.
Amazing. What other questions do you love to ask people during a process to help to identify the right kind of talent?
Yeah, it's a good question actually. And I think it's not to throw people off, but asking them about, again, how I get asked is the falling forward moments, right? Where did you make a mistake and how did you learn from it? Be it in a deal, be it in a business, be it kind of a cultural issue, it could be anything, right? Being able to understand that a person is able to accept that, I had a mess up here, but what I learned from it was X or Y. I think listening to those stories is very important to me, because that kind of shows that, how robust is somebody. Because when you're in a startup, and I always say to these people joining startups, is like, it's not necessarily always going to be a smooth ride, right? There's going to be challenges. We're going to come across them every day. We'll understand them. We'll kind of document them. We'll fix them, and we move on. But if you're expecting a kind of a fully smooth kind of journey, that's not going to be the case. So I think the agility part is very important. And one way I like to talk about it is like, it's like flying a plane, right? You're flying a plane while you're trying to build it at the same time. So you've got to have that level of agility and thinking, and accept that every day is going to be different. And I think for some people they love that.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, the challenge, right? It's like, some people just go, "Well, what's the OTE? What's the holidays? What
Yeah,
time do I start?" And some people go like, "What's the business problem we're trying to solve? Why is our solution help customers? What do you need? What would like make you say wow in a year's time? What's the success criteria?"
yeah.
How important for you, and this sounds like a very leading question, so maybe I'll try and open it up, but quality of questions. So, like how well someone answers questions, I think probably is one of the mistakes that people make in recruitment, particularly. I don't think revenue leaders do this as much, but HR teams are taught to ask certain questions, and then there's a type of answer that's good, right?
Yeah,
Behavioral type of questions,
yeah.
experience type questions. But we know that salespeople are better at asking questions. That's what makes the best ones great. And you talked about, the ones that have got that resourcefulness and they're figuring stuff out and they're solving problems. It's because
Mhm.
they're curious, they're inquisitive, they're highly intelligent and interested in solving challenges. So how important are questions that people would ask you as part of your hiring criteria?
I think the questions are extremely important, because if you look at the person you're interviewing, they are absolutely fantastic at reading body language, and they're absolutely fantastic of reading the room and understanding what the right thing is to say. It's an art, right? It's a psychology kind of behind it. So if you're just asking the tell me about your last 3 years. What did you do great at? You need to go a bit in depth, right? You need to ask the questions about the doing, the execution part. So talk to me about, right, that number's great. Yeah, it looks fantastic. But how did you go and achieve it? What did you do differently compared to your peers that made you successful and make you stand out? Now, when things weren't going right, and everyone's had those quarters where it's not looking too great, what did you do? and what I'll be looking for is, do they pick up the pace? Do they go and think out the box? Do they go in on their own initiative without
No,
direction, go and do something different,
no.
generated a lead and got it closed within 6 weeks, wherever it may be? And that's what I'm kind of looking for, right? Is that, can they think on that feet? And it all comes back to this thinking execution. And I think it's quite often quite overlooked, is within that process, are they able to show that rather than just the standard questions, can they do that? Can they think outside the box and drive that change? And then you need that type of person times 4 or 5 or times 6 to start doing that, and then you get your success.
Yeah. Okay. I love it. I love it. So I've worked out, I think there's 4 core behaviors that make like an entrepreneur, a very good early stage salesperson, revenue leader, critical GTM hire. And it's collaboration, ownership, resourcefulness, and execution.
Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about the ownership part, like that, you're not having to chase them, it's theirs. They treat it like it's their own baby. We talked about resourcefulness, we talked about execution. And then this collaboration piece, I think, will be really useful maybe to link into what I wanted to talk to you about next, which is how teams can work together. Because in a startup, right, it's not like you have sales, marketing, growth marketing
No.
is different. Then you've got product, and they're all islands and silos, which I guess a lot of businesses actually probably do have as a challenge. But
Yeah.
how important is it for you when you're hiring and building teams that they are thinking collaboratively about the business challenge?
Yeah. Fundamental. And I think this is a point that should be sitting right at the top, because sales cannot be successful in a vacuum, right? There's a whole ecosystem that kind of sits behind it. So it's your engagements with your growth team, your marketing team, your events team, your senior leadership as well, right? There's lots of different moving parts, and I think the alignment is important. First of all, on a leadership side, is to build up rapport and that culture of collaboration rather than silo. I think
Mm.
where the silo takes place, it's where the business is broken. If there's not enough accountability, then it doesn't work. If I look at back some of my previous jobs, where we had build out these teams and had to work collaboratively, it's quite important to actually align up the OKRs as well, right? We always talk about OKRs, but if they're misaligned, then it doesn't work either. So if your collaborative teams are popping the champagne because they've had a great week and you're still struggling because there hasn't been enough revenue, then there's total misalignment of what the OKR should be, right? OKR should be about what the end result is. That here's the ICP, here's the product. There's all kind of harmony and match there, and the end result was we've converted a customer who now stick with us and spend X with us, right? So I think that alignment is very important. But having those weekly kind of catch ups with them is important, but there needs to be an agenda, and needs to be an action plan, accountability. I remember having growth meetings with my growth team on a weekly basis and saying, right, so what have you done for my business this week or last week? And having that level of accountability. Otherwise, it's like two swim lanes. They're parallel, but they're actually meeting in between. You need to have that true calibration where the product is the product stacks up, the ICP stacks up, marketing are doing their bit, growth marketing are doing their bit. Salespeople are doing theirs. Sales direction is coming from the top of where we need to be, and that all together. And it's almost like spinning plates, right? One starts getting a wobble, you need to give it attention and run back to the rest of them. So I think that collaboration is important. And where this doesn't happen, where there are silos or a lack of accountability, I think that's where the gaps emerge, because it's not just sales responsibility, it's not just marketing responsibility. Everyone's in sales, right? The whole aim is, if we generate revenue, then everything's been successful, from the person who creates content all the way to the person in the front line who's actually making cold calls and closing the deals. So I think that true lineage of collaboration is key. And yeah, I've seen many a time where that doesn't happen, things don't work.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the most common challenges that you've seen businesses facing in the way that their teams operate together when you've first gone into it? It's like, you're just going in with your inspection around what's happening and figuring it all out. What are some of those common challenges that you're used to seeing?
Yeah, I think it's to do with kind of sales, 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 sell more, sell more, sell more. But the underpinning part is, if first of all, understanding, is the product a good market fit? Is there a gap? Are we bringing value? Is there something we actually are bridging? And do we truly understand our ICP? So I think running at speed when people say sell, 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 they expect exponential activity, without really getting the core understood and sorted, understanding, is there a market fit for our product? Do we really understand our ICP? Have we done some A/B testing to confirm that yes, this is where our market space is? And I think running at speed and not having that nailed down causes lots of issues, because you get kind of burnout, lack of energy, because you're running at speed and not success is not coming through, is because you haven't nailed down the fundamentals. So understanding that product market fit, understanding your ICP, doing the A/B testing, having that data to show this is what works, right? This type of customer is what kind of works for us. And I think also constantly changing your ICP led by your last previous closed deal is also a big no-no, without understanding the data behind it, saying, can we actually replicate this solution, replicate this situation, or was it a kind of sales that was made on relationships, or higher up connection, or somebody that was linked to the company, or something else, right? And I've seen so many times that the ICP is changing on a weekly basis, and I'm like, that can't be the right thing, right? There must be an issue, underground issue that's causing it, right? So do not let your ICB be kind of directed by your last sell, right? And all jumping on the same bandwagon and trying to do it again, because sometimes
Yeah.
it's not possible.
Can we maybe talk about a specific example? We obviously I don't have to name specific companies, but could you give us a real life example of where not going after the right ICP has caused some challenges, and then what you did about it?
Yeah, sure. So one of the areas I can think about, and it's a standard answer, you get across lot of organizations, is right. We need to focus on enterprise because that's where the money's going to come from. We want those six-figure deals, and then we all know as leaders that that takes time. It takes the right type of team and people and guidance, but also there are lots of different stakeholders in these businesses, right? That you have to convince and understand their motivations and why they're doing it. What's in it for them, why they're really going to buy. And you got your sales methodologies like Medic and Spin and Gap selling and all those kind of things, right? And it takes a lot of time. And what I found in one of the organizations was, because we had closed a number of enterprise deals previously, and they were of large sums, the aim was, right, concentrate enterprise, this is where we need to be. And we burnt a whole bunch of time creating account plans, account mapping of people, organization, doing the research, and spent X amount of months on it and didn't even touch the surface. And I think the learning from that is, after doing your research, is pushing back, saying, and I say this to all the organizations, is we need to do the right amount of business, right? We need to do the right amount of micro business, medium-sized business, and large deals, right? If we're thinking about weekly and monthly and quarterly, then the big enterprise deals are going to take anything between 6 to 18 months to actually get over the line. Lots of stakeholders, lots of things, to convince. Also, some of the stakeholders may be more engaged with a certain type of technology, and you're outside of that, so it's a big job over there. But what we did is we kind of fell forward and said, right, this is right for this organization. This is the right thing to do. Let's really drill down on who buys from us and why. And once we drilled down that and understood, right, actually, it's not the enterprise guys. It's actually um, the mid-sized organizations who've got these problems, because they don't have the larger teams, they're not tech savvy necessarily, but they want to move really, really fast. And they want to make sure they have full ownership. And then when we started honing on in those, that's when we realized, right, this is where our kind of sweet spot is. And guess what? The six-figure deals came from that space. So we started off doing, 150K deals, 250K deals, up until 750K deals from that space. And these organizations were not even enterprise. And then we drilled down into why was the decision taken, and it came out that some of these enterprise customers we had actually started very small initially with us and grew over the years to become a very large client. And we were like, okay, if we had known this information prior, then we would have kind of angled it slightly different. But that's an example where, we went with one ICP. That was the direction where we needed to go. Learned from it, revoked it, made a change. Not saying we didn't stop. We stopped working on those large accounts. We continued working them, but we started doing the right amount of business. What are we going to close this month? What are we going to close this quarter? Versus what are we going to close in three quarters time, which we're working on right now? And that really worked out for us.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think, well, not only from an activity point of view for people's, focus and sanity and progress, but also from a forecasting point of view, right? Because if you're going into a new part of the market like enterprise and you don't have a track record of doing it, and maybe there's a load of unknowns around how you are ready to go and actually deliver that, how on earth could you forecast that? But the business is investing into it, so they want to know, like, what's the ROI gonna be and when are we gonna go and see that return? Otherwise, people start to panic, right? So that has to be set. I wonder what you've learned about setting the right expectations around when these things that you're focusing on, this strategy and these tactics, will actually turn into progress. Like, what have you learned around setting the right expectations?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times there's a lot of salesperson's gut and guesstimation that comes from the team, right? I think it's going to close then. I think where I've kind of honed into forecasting things correctly for my team or the sales managers that kind of work for me is kind of doing the reverse engineering in the sense of like, how many people you're going to need to meet to get there, how long it's going to take a number of weeks. And then you've got the procurement that can take 2 to 3 weeks. You've got vacations that come in between. So really reverse engineering how many people we're going to need to meet, convince, get on side, or have multiple meetings with, to get to where we need to get to. And a lot of it, the early signs are already there, right? So kind of understanding on if you're selling a cloud solution, are they cloud native? Who are they working with? Or are they still an on-prem organization which you're going to need to convince? And are you breaking the norm? What's the current technology stack? Are they all colored in one color? Are they native to one organization to another, or have they got a state which is a mixture of things, which means they've tried some different things and kind of gone with it. So I kind of take all that data into account and think, right, this is going to take at least 8 months or 9 months to close because we've got big organization, lots of people to meet. And also looking at the organization itself, right? What can we find out about them? Are they under an M&A at the moment, and that's a big no-no, or are they looking for further investment, or is something big happening with them? So all these kind of things tell a telltale of where it's going to go, and also the level we engage in is also important, right? Everyone talks about top down, bottom up, top down, whatever, and whichever methodology. And I think it's a mixture of both. Is right. You need to get the information from the people that've got the pain, but the pain holder is someone further up. And if you don't have access to them, so we're talking about economic buyers and things like that. If you don't have access to them, you are so far distance, and there's so many people you're going to need to meet in between to get to that level and say, right, you have this challenge, and I know about it, and these are all the metrics around it. Here is a solution that I have that addresses X, Y, Z, and additionally gives you X, all these additional values. Can we help you? And this is a timeline we actually can get it done by. But to get to that level of conversation takes a lot of time. And as you know, trying to get hold of people, especially at sea level, is extremely difficult.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm wondering, I'd love to talk about critical relationships inside a business. So, you've been country manager, you've been VP of sales. That's a very cross functional role, right? And you talked about one of the mistakes that people make being is too much. This is sales. We just need more numbers.
Yeah.
What are those like most important relationships that you look to build when you join an organization to make sure that you are thinking collaboratively, that you aren't forming or living with the silos that might exist in that company today?
Yeah, I think clear expectation and I think transparency is important, and accepting the fact, right? Is I go into an organization, I'll do my due diligence, and I come back with a whole host of things that are broken, right? And I think one of the key important things is when you're working with the C level on the board is acceptance that this is broken, but also going with the solution, saying this is how we fix it. Where I found where there's challenges is not accepting the fact that something's broken, because then you're constantly pushing against a closed door, and I'm kind of fighting the corner, saying this is broken for this reason, but here's a solution that will address it. So I think that level of transparency and acceptance and agreeing that here's a solution that may fix the problem. I think is important, because you're going to come across many of those on a weekly and monthly basis, right? How do we solve those? So having that relationship and that trust as well, and trust and respect is very important. That um here's somebody that's come in. They're coming uh, a new set of eyes. They're not going to go through the status quo. They're going to do their research, come back with where we think things are broken,
Yeah.
and we need to listen to them.
Yeah.
And that listening to them, and everyone's got the ability to object and question, which is absolutely fine. But I think closing the door, saying no, that's not a broken problem, go and concentrate on something else. I think that's where challenges arise, where we can't move forward as quickly because there's a lack of acceptance that something is not working.
Yeah. So the relationship with the board and I suppose the people who are
The
ultimately
leadership, the
the
leadership, yeah,
leadership team, that's a
yeah,
critical one, right?
they're
And
very
then
critical.
and what you've mentioned there is that there has to be like a willingness that I guess you're gonna go basically in and call their baby ugly, you know?
Yeah, and it's not always a nice conversation to have, but that's what you're there for, right? They're there to make turn things around, make it a better place. So we can, the whole things that been holding us back is actually fix those and move forward. So collectively, as a team, we can achieve what the company's goals are. And if you're taking the time to go and speak to all the different key stakeholders in the business, marketing and sales and all those kind of things, and you're taking all that information up, digesting and saying, right, we've got a big disconnect here because this part of the organization is not talking to this part of the organization. As a result,
Yeah.
this is happening, right?
Yeah.
And this and what's wrong, and all those things are important because sometimes people don't want to be seen as the person who's calling out the challenges. They're happy to talk to somebody else saying like, this is really broken I mean, coffee machine talks are great. This is broken, that's broken, whatever, but they don't want to be seen as the person that says, here's a problem
Yeah.
and this needs to be addressed. And most of the times they have the solution, but they just don't have the voice to say, right, this is not working because they're afraid of wherever it may be. So being that conduit in terms of collecting all that information, understanding how do we fix the process, how do we fix a people problem, how do we fix a cultural problem or a productivity challenge, taking that to C-level and saying, right, these are things that I found, these are the challenges, and I propose, from my experience, these are the changes that we make. And I think that's the most important part because just highlighting the problems is great, right? But what solutions from your experience are you going to bring? Be it we need to make some changes to the org, or we need a few more levels in between that take care of this challenge because this person's getting overburdened, whatever the scenario may be. But I think that transparency, that respect, and having someone hear you out and saying, yes, I've heard things like this before as well. I haven't really had time to look into it, but great you've picked it up, and let's go and do a quick pilot on this, or let's go have a meeting with the right stakeholders, get this resolved so we can move forward. So each one of those challenges you plug basically adds to your success as a business, right? And those little plugs you put in place means that the goal that you've got for double digit growth or the revenue growth or wherever it may be starts happening. I think that's very important because people always concentrate just on the numbers and sell more, but it's all these other underlying challenges that must be plugged before you make it happen.
When did you learn all of this? So this particularly this like we have to be able to identify like really what's broken, where these teams aren't talking together, where our goals are misaligned. What was the point in your career where you really like figured that out?
So the time I figured that out was probably and it's a different weird story, was at IBM, right? I had lots of moving parts in one engagement or multiple engagements in a customer. You had lots of different moving parts. And I took on a role as a client exec, which means you're managing a lot of the different brands that are trying to sell into one single customer. And it's all about, I'm more important and I need to get this in. And there was so many moving parts. And again, it was down to people, it was product, it was process, it's lots of silos, lots of different agendas as well, right? People have got their own agendas they're trying to run, and making sure that in front of the client when we are submitting the overall bids or we're having meetings, that we were all kind of gelled and we knew what was going on rather than fragmented silo conversation with customers going, I've had 15 calls about the same thing, and this person's from X brand within IBM, this person from X brand, and there was a lot of kind of cultivating that had to be done to make it a success. And then from that, I learned that, you know what, this is a big organization with this many challenges. I'm sure the organizations that are not the big oil tankers have got similar challenges on a smaller scale, but the challenges still exist. Different departments got their own agendas, got their own targets, and they're trying to run side by side, but they're not talking to each other or not collaborating at the right times. And also making meetings effective. Nothing worse than having a whole diary full of meetings and then there was no output at the end of it. There was no action, there was no agenda, and no action came out of it. So the next meeting we can have, we can say, right, were those things done? Who was accountable? Has it been done? What's the result? What's move on next? So a lot of structure that I learned came from that.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of that's like leadership fundamentals, right? And it's not just the whole like how do we sell? What's the ICP? That whole sort of go to market motion. It's literally like the structure of how we lead people, and then we've talked about like bringing the right people in, creating the right structure. I think it's fascinating. And you mentioned about OKRs. I'm doing a consulting project with a client. I know we spoke in the green room about it, but I'm doing a consulting project with a client right now to help them to establish an OKR, an appraisal process into their business because they've been acquiring businesses. They've got a number of different sites now, and they want to create that like joined up view of what success looks like. So they're quite green, even though they're like a £6 million business and they've been around for like 12 years. But this is like a relatively new area for them. When you're going into, let's say, these, Series A businesses, how often do you find they don't have any kind of objective setting process, or how much of it is they are doing it, but it's not been effective? What's the reality that you see?
I see normally two sides. In some areas, some organizations, they have not got there yet, which is not a problem. It's all about growth and getting down the journey. And in some organizations, they got the software in, but never used it. You know, didn't quite really understand how do we actually set the kind of objectives for people in different various different roles and stuff. So a lot of times they're not there. Now, if I look at it from a sales perspective, for a sales rep, you got a number, right? That's your target, and that's what you signed up to, and your OT is aligned to that. But how I've used OKRs is to drive behavior, right? Not just within sales, but other departments as well. There's a whole fundamental bunch of other things that people need to do to become successful. And unless you put it down as an objective, it goes, it's set on a call week on week, and nothing happens. Unless you have a measurable, saying one of your measurables are X. On a weekly basis, when we have our one-to-ones, we're going to go through how you're getting on with your OKRs. So when we get to the end of the quarter, there's no surprises. We're not trying to backfill data. We had that data on a daily basis, right? Now, OKR details, I kind of break it down to a lot of lower level detail. Number of customer meetings that you've booked on your own accord, your Salesforce hygiene, all these kind of things. And the reason for that output is, I'm a person that likes kind of data led decisions. If you don't have the data and you don't have the behaviors to put the data in, how are you going to know what's broken? Right? So things like the kind of CRM kind of hygiene, number of meetings that you've met, all those kind of what we kind of count as softer things are actually fundamental to the end success. So going into organizations, setting these kind of OKRs are really important, and it comes into, like we mentioned, my 5 Ps. But the programming side of the 5 Ps is all about the whole kind of story of kind of fish for me for a day and I can survive, but teach me how to fish and I can survive for life. So rather than me all having to ask you every single day and every single week, is this done, or have we done that, have we done that, I kind of want to put in the programming in place where we have our one-to-ones, we ask things are going, and the person knows what to expect. They're fully prepared with their data, saying this. So we're spending that time talking about how do we resolve things and move forward. Where are the gaps? Where can I give you an angle where you haven't thought about, and that might help you kind of move it forward. So it's all about that kind of collaboration rather than kind of, micromanaging kind of thing. Move away from the word micromanaging and getting in the trenches with the people, but setting the right rhythm for them to become successful. And this has worked again and again and again. It works every single time. And they get into a rhythm, they know what's expected. And we spend more time talking about important things rather than the same old kind of mundane, is your sales was up to date? Have you read this? Have you done that? So putting those OKRs in place to drive that behavior is fundamental.
Yeah, okay, I love it. And I think we talked a lots about the problem, and then you just mentioned the 5 Ps. So if I just summarize, we've talked about hiring the right people, we've talked about the type of challenges and problems that businesses ask you to help them solve. And it's like, how do we move into double-digit growth? We've talked about you need the right structure, teams to work together, to hire the right behaviors, encourage the right behaviors, have the right structure for people to work to, the right goals for people to work to, focusing on the right targeting in terms of the market and not, making snap decisions around moving to different things. So we've covered so much ground. Let's talk about this solution. So this simplified, which I think is brilliant, because when a business is trying to solve a problem, I think anyone that can simplify something into a system clearly knows their shit. And so let's talk about these 5 Ps. What are they?
Yeah, so I think it's come from, over the last 25 years of working for a whole raft of different organizations and trying to find those common areas, right? You're trying to put into buckets of things that we need to change to become successful. And that's where these 5 Ps that I came up with came to fruition. I use it in every organization I kind of go into. But and it touches upon some of the things we already mentioned just earlier, but it's around the people, the product, the process, the productivity, and programming, right? And these things have multiple multiple activities and actions that come out of it. So we spoke about the people side of things, and the people side of things is building the right culture, right? The team that got you to the 3 million to date may have hit the roof. It may not be the right team that takes you to 30 million, right? So understanding their behaviors, their attitudes, and what their roadmap is. The most important thing, what is your roadmap? Where do you want to be in a year's time, 2 years time, 3 years time? And kind of understanding that and building that right kind of culture. And we spoke about thinking versus execution as well, right? Previous numbers are great. That's what people use. But have you got the ability to be lifted and shifted into a fresh organization, different solution, be able to adopt, be agile, change, and drive results at the same time? So that people thing is important. And we spoke about collaboration as well, right? It's not just about the salespeople, right? It's all about the other teams that are also working closely with sales or should be collaborating with the sales team to make a success. From the person who's writing content all the way down to the SDR making those cold calls, there should be lineage and there should be connectivity on that side of things. Product, we kind of spoke about the product side of things, right? The ICP, is it the right market fit? Do we understand the product? Are we able to demo it? Do we have enough understanding to have a conversation with a fairly, if it's a technical solution, with a fairly technical guy, and still have credibility and value rather than being caught out, right? So all those kind of things around product, the fit, is it right for the market? Have we understood it? Is key. Process, and it's not just about the sales process, but the process for everything, right? So the process of how marketing is done, the process of content that goes out, the process of growth marketing and how they work. So understanding, first of all, confirming what sales process is, and you'll be surprised a lot of times, Richard, go into organizations and the sales process is not nailed down. It's like we use CRM and we use X and Y, but the sales process slightly differs. So kind of nailing that down. And what that helps is then, again, you kind of mentioned forecasting, but it helps to mention that if it's a stage 1 and 2, we know this is still an early stage deal. If it gets into 3 and 4 with shared pricing, we now actually, we have a proposal, we have a price on the table, we have an economic buyer, we have a champion. This deal has a higher probability of closing. But if the sales process is not nailed down, how can you benchmark anything against it? So nailing that sales process, and not just, and this is quite important for change, extremely important, is make the people who are impacted by change involved in that process. Do not set it in a silo and in a vacuum and roll it out and expect everyone to follow. And this same follows for any type of change. Involve the people, because most and majority of the time they have the answers. They know what the issues are. They know what wants to be bridged. So involve them. So what I've always done is when there's major change, we'll get the teams that are using certain processes or certain systems into a room, say, right, let's whiteboard this out. Let's put a flow diagram. What happens? What you do in a daily thing? Right, I do this, I do that. Right. So we've got 5 activities in CRM that need to be completed, but actually over 2 phone calls, you actually completed most of them. So do we really need to have an X amount? So involving them in that process, again, coming onto that people side of thing, building the right culture. Any change you're making around the process or systems, keep them involved. Then productivity, I think it says it all, right? Productivity is you know it goes hand in hand. The amount you put in is what you're going to get out. So making sure we're doing the right things and not just doing the things for the sake of it. Like, for example, success is not making 1,000 calls. That's great. That's great productivity. But success is out of those 1,000 calls that we made today, 10 customers have actually engaged, understand the value, want to have a follow-on call to discuss further. So, productivity wise, the 1,000 is great. That's really, really good. But how do we get more of the 10 or 15 that we did? So that level of productivity on a daily basis, and making sure pipelines at the key, right? What happens is, initially when you start an organization, it's about pipeline growth, and then people get excited when the deals are there, right? They're working on their deals, and they forget about this pipeline side of things. That's pushed to one side, and once they close their deals, they go, "Oh, holy shit! I don't have anything else to now move forward." So
Yeah.
bringing it back to forefront of mind on a regular basis, then, guys, what are you doing for pipeline generation? Because the number of deals you generate now is fantastic, and I'm really happy. But what we're going to do thereafter, it, right? You've got a whole target to hit for the year. What other things are you going to be doing to generate your pipeline? And see marketing and growth as your internal stakeholder as business. They'll generate this for you. They'll generate that for you. But what are you going to generate yourself as well? And then the programming, which I kind of mentioned already, is that kind of bringing that structure in place without having to constantly ask for things. You kind of rework that muscle memory thing. Like, this is the expectation. This is what we need to be successful, and it's given. It's a proven record. Let's do these right things and make it happen. And what I see is that people that believe into this structure of the 5 Ps are the ones that become the top 5 in the organization, and they go on to now, become leaders, which is now amazing for me that I worked with people that were at the start of some of the start of their career, who were whatever SDRs or didn't have sales experiences, kind of became very, very successful salespeople who are now become leaders who are going to be managing teams who I still kind of mentor. And I think that's a fantastic thing. So that's what I mean about asking about people's own roadmap is very, very important, because then you know which direction they're going in.
Yeah. I love that. And it's true. I can definitely vouch for that. Whenever I think about the best people that we've like hired together and that I know you've worked with, and I catch up with them or I ask you about them, you're like, yeah, I spoke to them last week. So you've kept relationships with so many of these people, which is fantastic. And yeah, a lot of them are becoming like,
Yeah.
top salespeople,
And I
sales
think
lead.
again, it starts from scratch, right? It's that level of trust, respect, transparency. And when times are hard, it's not woolly, right? Things get serious. You got to have serious conversations saying, this is not working. It's
Yeah,
not working for me, and it's not
yeah,
working for you.
yeah,
What are you going to do
yeah,
about it? And
yeah,
and that's what counts. And that level of trust, respect, and trustworthy, I think, then carries on. Is, when they're making big decisions in their life, they're like, let me call Rakesh and see what he thinks. And then it's great. I think it's great that people are progressing that way.
yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Maybe we'll go through quickly on each one and just maybe just get a thing that people struggle with. So if we talk about the people side, first P, why do you think businesses do struggle to find the right talent?
I think it's a very open-ended question, right? And it's the area of your expertise. But I think in a lot of organizations, you build out your talent teams that are looking for looking for the right people. And I think the level of experience on that side, they're asking, they're and a lot of times asking, all they're seeing is kind of, evaluating the CV, asking very basic questions in that screening side of things. And they're like, yep, this guy's fantastic. They've done this, they've done that. And they're like, okay, they put them through the second interview, and you go through your structure of questions, and you realize very quickly that there's a massive mismatch. So you have to go through a lot of stage 2 interviews to then actually find the smaller number to go to kind of, no, level 3. And I think it comes back to this level of being able to identify the behavior and the way that someone ticks outside of their CV. Numbers are great, right? But I've seen challenges where where someone's selling a fixed product, and they know all the functions and features about it, and they're great at selling it. But you put them into a world where they're selling a platform that could do millions of things, and because it's not tangible, they really struggle to get their head around how they actually make it work. And there's a certain amount of obvious guidance and support you can provide, but within their mindset, they can't actually get around. I don't have a fixed product to talk about. So sometimes, the challenges are there. So, to answer that question, I think looking beyond just numbers, but looking at the culture, the behavior, the thinking and execution balance, I think is where you find the right people.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think it is like that whole the talent team, I never would blame anyone in talent for the challenges that they face. I think that they have a really tough job. I think
It's a
when we
hard gig. It's definitely a hard gig. I mean, trying to cultivate and find the right people, use all the different resources that you have, and they got targets to hit too, right? So they're under pressure to get people in.
Yeah, exactly. I think when we first started working together, the talent team had like 3 people in it, and there was like 70 roles they were working on with like 25 different hiring managers across like technical, operations, sales, marketing. You're like, that's an impossible job. Like I would really, really struggle with that myself after doing this for like 17 years. So to have like someone who's like 23 and it's their first ever sort of sales job, I think is really hard. I think the other challenge I see businesses have is they don't really appreciate, particularly at startup, how much recruitment is a sales process.
Yeah.
And that ability to ask the right questions, to understand the true motivations that people would have, and how much there is alignment between what they're looking for with what is available at the company, and then giving them a chance to go and actually show what they can do all before they've even like moved through the process. So by the time I would find someone and say, Rakesh, I found you someone that you should definitely speak to, that's going to be a really good person and it's going to be a great conversation. And I think that sales part, which isn't I'm selling and selling the dream of something, it's
Yeah.
I'm asking the right questions and giving them an opportunity to showcase their sales skills. I don't think talent teams get taught because often they haven't worked in sales. They've never carried a number. They've
Yeah.
never managed people. How would they know?
No.
You know?
Yeah, and exactly. And I think in previous roles, I've kind of written profiles in terms of what we're looking for and stuff. And even though it's written, it's really difficult for someone to engage because they haven't lived that world, right? It's similar to any kind of sales based role. Majority of people have lived that life. They've done what their teams are doing now, so they have the understanding of what's involved and how much rigor and how much effort goes into it. But because you're hiring for, one day you're hiring for a salesperson, next person you're hiring for a HR person, that skill set is so wide that you can't really build that kind of knowledge of what is it you're kind of looking for, apart from fixed questions, or fixed questions, but open-ended questions that just says yes, take the answer that with X and Y. And I think of recent, the last couple of years, we've kind of fallen into this and a method of interviewing just online. And I think by having that one or two face-to-face interview sessions or a task, I think really is a game changer because then they haven't got lots of paper around them. They haven't got ChatGPT open. They've got to think for themselves. And I think those answers that come back and how they quickly think on their feet really kind of shows something about the person. So yeah, what I like to do is if we have the online stuff, and we're like, okay, let's do a face-to-face interview as well. Or here's a scenario. I want you to prepare for it, and I look at how they prepare for it, and necessarily don't give them the expected output. Because the output could be anything, but I leave it down to them of how they prepare for it. And that kind of shows a lot. And from those interviews, I think I learn a lot more than those initial stage 1, 2, and 3 interviews that I do.
Yeah. And I think people appreciate it, right? Because they want to be challenged. And I think the people that wouldn't want to do that probably is a bit of a red flag because you need them to be doing the thinking and then the execution. And if they're just relying on AI to go, I never thought about the AI. Although I would always recommend a face-to-face stage unless it's
Yeah.
impossible to go and do, even if you're a remote company. But I hadn't thought about the fact that of course everyone's using AI. When I
Yeah.
speak to candidates now, I can see them looking at their second screen.
Yeah.
Right? And
Exactly.
we do a video process now because I want to bring like the human element into a process. So I'll like record a video about the opportunity and then they will send the video back.
Yep.
And I know it's like an extra step, but it's way better than just hitting easy apply, getting 500 applications, and then me looking at their resume. Like it's a chance for them to see. I do the video first. It's not like I'm going, here's my job ad. Now you send me a video. It's like I'm going to do a video first. Now let's reciprocate. And you see the ones that go, at this company, the thing that made me a force multiplier was my ability to, and you're like, oh, come on, versus the ones that actually go and go,
I'll tell you a perfect example. In a previous couple of pre-organizations, we did a challenge which was record your own pitch of what we do and submit it, so we can see the levels. And then because someone is going to be watching it that knows what you're talking about, the amount of re-records we had were immense. But that kind of showed that, look, guys, we need to nail this, right? We need to be pitch perfect. Where someone says, "What is your organization does?" You're ready, you're prepared, you're in constant kind of sales mode, rather than thinking, "Well, asking questions in between, but prepared for it. But the amount of times that the guy said they had to re-record it goes to show when you're under a bit of pressure and you're talking to somebody who knows what they're talking about, people get nervous. So doing these exercises helps people get in the right shape of what's to come.
Yeah, exactly. And I think salespeople should all be happy to do that. I mean, video prospecting, we just started using a video tool, and we're getting 8 times the response rates that we did when we were just sending out like written DMs. Because I think if you get a written DM nowadays, you think it's AI, a VA, or it's a sequence.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone actually takes the time to go and record a video, for me, it's like it's a no-brainer that would be a great way to stand out. So I think that testing someone's ability to do that, get an outcome, and feel comfortable doing it, and have that bias for action says a lot again. And I think that there'll always be a world where that sort of stuff gets hate, or you want people to come into an office and do a task, or you want people to do a video. You
Yeah.
shouldn't do that. I'm like, we're building an elite sales team here. We want the top 1%.
Yeah.
And that really means that we need people that are prepared to sort of step into the unknown and do something that's a bit uncomfortable for them.
Yep.
So I'm fully behind it.
I've had it done to myself. I'd get a call the night before saying it's a very important meeting happening at X organization. There's the CEO, COO, and CEO. You need to run the meeting because CEO needs to be somewhere else, and you've got to be ready. If you get nerves getting there, you're providing materials, you build wherever you need to build, you get ready, you go into the meeting, and you come back with success. So being that putting that kind of nervousness and shyness aside, and being ready to pitch whenever it's needed, that what makes a person stand out.
Yeah, I love that. I wonder, here's an interesting thing I thought that I've just had, which is let's say someone's listening to this, they're a founder, or maybe they're an investor, or maybe they're on the board, maybe they're a co-owner of a business.
Mm.
They're looking to bring in a revenue leader or a country manager, someone like you.
Is who?
What process would you recommend that they do follow to get the right person in a senior leadership hire? What process would you like to go through and recommend that they would put in place?
I thought it was interesting. So yeah, process. What I would say that, and I've used the same in hiring senior people as well. Is screening is important. The first call with a senior leadership is important, but thereafter, I think the face to face is where it counts, right? And it shouldn't be all about interrogation of your CV, because that's a flat document, right? It's talking about the stories and the use cases that we mentioned today, where things work, things didn't work. How did that change happen? And the end result's the end result, right? Hitting 12 million in 3 years, or hitting X, Y. That was the end result. But it's the graph, the hustle, the journey in between, which is important. So digging deeper into those behaviors, and what makes it work and what makes it tick, I think is the right thing. So having those face-to-face meetings, could be multiple versions of them, and sometimes board members want to come in too, because you're making a big decision. They want to understand the investment you're making is the right thing, and there's no harm in doing that. Right, getting a member of the board to give them a flavor of, is this person right for our business? Have they got the depth and breadth to make this happen? Have they got the urgency, and the kind of attention to detail to execute against what we need? It's fundamental. Rather than find out afterwards saying, well, oops, this person wasn't going to do this. So I think looking beyond the numbers and making sure that the person's a good cultural fit. I think it's the most important thing. To date, if you're 5 or 6 years down the line, you'll have built up a certain culture. And you will understand, will this person fit into our culture and make it better and greener? Or is this person's culture going to stop progress? And I think this is very important. It's something that always often gets missed out, right? There's always concentration of what were your numbers, how did you build the teams, how many people worked for you, what numbers did they hit, where have you worked for previously, how long have you been doing it for, all those kind of things. And I think we miss this kind of, how did you build a positive culture, or where did you go into where the culture wasn't great, but you helped fix the culture because of X, Y, and issue. I think this is what, where you build positive cultures, where everyone takes accountability, everyone has that transparency, and everyone's working towards the same goal, is where success comes. And I think leaving this cultural part out as, here's a HR tick box, that's where things go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And just misunderstanding what culture fit means. I've tried to work this through, and in a similar way as your 4 Ps, your 5 Ps, I've got the 4 Cs of culture. So like from bad to good. So bad is conflicted. People are fighting against each other. And we have compliant. People do it because they're told to avoid being in trouble. They will work together, but only to avoid being in trouble. You have cooperative, which is we'll cooperate when told, and we will work together and we'll get a good result. But this is going to be proactive, and the business and the leaders are always going to get frustrated that our teams aren't just naturally working together. We have to instruct it. We have to create a situation. But the best level, collaborative. And that like we're all working together. We're talking about shared outcomes. We are a one big team trying to solve this big thing together. We proactively think that way. We take initiative.
Yeah.
And that for me is that positive culture. So when people talk about we want culture fit or culture add, it's like, will you, by hiring this person, move further towards collaboration or closer to conflicted? And a lot
Yeah.
of leaders in businesses, when they've managed a certain revenue number or a certain number of people, might have led through fear.
Yeah.
And they might have led through a compliant culture, and they might have only ever got to a cooperative culture. So I think if businesses can ask questions around, tell me about how you've created collaboration as the culture of the business. Tell me about how you fixed something that was broken. Tell me about a conflicted culture that you worked in. That language can actually be very useful because it just clicks in people's brains, right?
Absolutely. And kind of fear is the killer of all innovation and growth, right? People don't speak up because, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing. But having that and not being excessively open, but having that openness where someone can bring something to the table and saying, this has been like this for a long time. And I'm not happy about it because it's not just impacts me as my personal role, but it's impacting the business. And this is where, when we talk about culture and collaboration is very, very important. You know, giving these people a voice without living under the fear that they're going to lose their job, but being able to collaborate and saying, like, I know these things are broken, but I just didn't want to bring it up because it sounded counterproductive. So that, killing that fear, but bringing in the innovation. So collectively as a team, we can move forward and get to the goals that the company has, rather than, those kind of conversations die at the coffee machine and nothing gets done about it.
Yeah, exactly. So Rakesh, I think in terms of like wrapping this up, I know that you do consulting with a lot of businesses. I know you obviously, work as a senior revenue leader and country manager of businesses. This will be a long form, evergreen piece of content that someone might find in 2 years' time. So what we say now might have aged by the time that this person watches it. But what's next for Rakesh?
That's always an interesting one. So, next for Rakesh is being build on strength. Looking for those organizations that need help. I've got the red flag up saying we desperately need help. Can you help us understand where our gaps are, where our shortcomings are, where we need change, and give us a bit of direction of what that GTM should look like. What we're doing today is status quo. We've done great, but we're now feeling we're not growing as quick, and we're kind of plateauing a little bit. Now, can you help us from clear eyes understand where those challenges are and tell us how to address them? And future is going to be, as more and more people embrace AI now, it's now where AI is going to tell you where the challenges are, but how are you now going to go and fix them? And there's a people element, there's a software element, there's a productivity element. So it's going to be more about the thinking part, I think, while people get their data sources together and have more lineage with using AI to tell them where the broken parts are. The execution part's going to get heavier and heavier now. How do we go and execute that in real life? Eight is X amount we can automate, but for the human elements, what do we need to do, and what direction do we need to do? And I think that's in the next couple of years. If we ever have this conversation again, it's going to be about, okay, a lot of thinking is done for us these days, but our execution's falling behind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll put your link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes so people can reach out to you. But Rakesh, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Great, Richard. Thanks for the invite, and it was a great talk.
Amazing. And for everyone else, we'll see you on the next episode.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this conversation, we've got a newsletter called Growth Magnet on LinkedIn, where we take the best insights from all of these episodes and turn them into bite-sized format for you to enjoy.